Alright, so here is our video for the review over our driving question of will humans destroy life on Earth? As you can see, we are going to be working to make the connection to what we've already talked about in class throughout this video. Feel free to watch this as many times as you want to help you understand this concept just a little better. If you remember correctly from last unit, we started to address the ecological levels of organization, where we started off with the individual. Then you went to the population where the individual acted within its own type, its own kind of species. We then went to the outside community where it's interacting with other species that would live in the same area as it. And this is also where we're going to start to see some food chains and food webs of that nature. So over here we could see some food chains and food webs in the community. And then finally in the ecosystem, as you see here, this is where we begin to start dealing with abiotic factors. If you remember correctly, try and jog your memory. Abiotic factors mean non-living factors. That's why we see things such as storm, sunlight, wind, water, dirt, rocks, fire. These are all things that are not living. Now, before we move on, we really need to have a fresh idea of your carbon cycle drawing. If you remember correctly, this is the mind map that we have been working on drawing in class. Please draw this mind map again and make this one the best you've made yet. When recalling all of this information, you should see that you are thinking about the carbon cycle game. Remember when we walked around the room and you looked at how the carbon moved from part of the ecosystem to other parts? Look back at that carbon cycle game if you need to, and look at the different places that you went, and then look at how you got to that location. For example, a lot of times carbon is released into the atmosphere by animals breathing it out in the form of carbon dioxide, possibly also humans. So again, go ahead and hit that pause button. Pause here, take absolutely as much time as you need to draw your carbon cycle mind map. Alright, so now that you have paused that video and you've drawn your mind map, let's go ahead and fact check that. We can use our diagram here to help you fact check that. Again, this can be found on our class website. Here you see the first place that we usually start with are the plants, but also make sure that you have the atmosphere listed. Remember that carbon is stored in the atmosphere as a greenhouse gas. A greenhouse gas is a gas in the atmosphere that helps to keep our planet warm. Think about what it feels like to walk into a greenhouse. It's usually quite humid and warm. Same kind of concept here. So that's where a lot of carbon is stored. Also be remembering about how humans are pumping lots and lots of carbon into the atmosphere through burning of fossil fuels, which means that they are just adding more greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. We also come over here to the surface ocean, where lots of carbon is stored as dissolved carbon dioxide. Things called phytoplankton perform photosynthesis, and it's a lot like what happens in the surface or in the soil, except this is actually in the surface ocean. Different organisms take that carbon in and make it a part of their being. And then once those organisms pass away or the plants die and they sink down to the bottom of the ocean, carbon becomes a part of the deep ocean. We also have fossil fuels, which we've learned about, are organisms that have died a long, long time ago, and with lots of pressure on top of them, they turn into this pure carbon form of fossil fuel. It's very, very high in energy through those carbon bonds. There's also a little bit of carbon in the soil. This is here from organisms that have died and not been put under very much high pressure yet. Also lots of plant matter that has been made a part of the soil. Remember that plants have lots of carbon in them, so as they die and decompose and become a part of the soil, they leave carbon behind. And then of course right here we do have our animals that participate in cellular respiration, which is when they breathe carbon dioxide out. Take a moment right here and write down the photosynthesis equation, if you have not already, on your mind map, and also connect that to the cellular respiration equation. In other words, how are animals connected to this food chain that involves plants, and what are the equations that show that food chain occurring? While you're doing that, also think about what level of ecological organization they belong to in this example. Okay, so please double check that you have the photosynthesis equation written down. Here is what it will look like. Photosynthesis is when there is carbon dioxide taken from the atmosphere, and inside of the plant it is combined with water and then typically sunlight energy. And what the plant does is it takes all of these molecules. Notice there's hydrogen on this side of the equation, hydrogen over here, carbon on this side of the equation, carbon over here, and there's oxygens here as well, making oxygens here. There are several steps that work to make this equation occur, but again, we just want to know the products of it. Then it makes a sugar and an oxygen. I've shown that here with the sunlight beaming down on this plant, taking in carbon dioxide and water, as well as oxygen. Please pause the video again here and think about how this relates to your floating disk lab, and write down on that page right next to your carbon cycle mind map, write down some ideas of how the floating disk lab connects to this photosynthesis equation. Again, pausing here to write these things down. So again, here we are just looking at photosynthesis and how it relates to the carbon cycle, and that is by the plants taking in carbon from the atmosphere using the energy from the sunlight to create sugar that animals eat, and then also, of course, oxygen that animals breathe in. So when thinking about this animal connection and our ecological levels of organization, we think about how animals are heterotrophs, meaning they have to eat food or consume food for energy. The first food that is made available by our planet is through plants. Those are our producers. That's why we call these primary consumers, which eat producers, aka those plants. They're called producers because they make their own food in the form of sugar from sunlight and carbon dioxide and water. Again, the photosynthesis equation that we just addressed. Once that primary consumer eats the producer they perform, the animal performs cellular respiration, which releases carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. Please make sure that you have the cellular respiration equation written down as well. Remember that this will be glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Again, that's glucose plus oxygen yields carbon dioxide, water, and energy. Recall in that video that we watched the very first day about carbon, how the gentleman in the video ate the carrot and then had energy from that because the carrot holds carbon bonds, and those carbon bonds are very high energy bonds. So here is where we can kind of relate this to the human body, just like they did in the video we watched before. We talk about chemical energy, carbohydrates. This is what the plant produces. That's sugar. Glucose is a carbohydrate. Once it's produced, that carbohydrate, we eat that food and we create energy. And in the process, because our body's broken down those bonds, we have to release some waste as well. And that waste comes in the form of carbon dioxide, water, and actually as well in the form of heat. But luckily, we're able to harness some of that energy and perform metabolism, which allows our body to use energy for things like movement and thinking and all of the different wonderful processes that our body does. Very last topic that we are going to be addressing in class is going to be over greenhouse gases and populations. We will talk about this together as a class, But for now, please watch this video as many times as you need. Follow along with your concept map as you do, so that you can really get this concept down and complete it to the best of your ability in our project.